Good evening, everyone. We continue with Hosea chapter 4. Remember, we are in our series 2, so we will spend a bit more time to dig under the Hebrew so that we have a clearer picture as to what the Hebrew is saying rather than depend on the English translation. But you can actually compare them as we walk through every verse and try to unpack some of the more challenging text. So in Hosea chapter 4, verse 1, it begins with a new vision that God is speaking through Hosea and is addressing very specifically, O sons of Israel. This would be Bnei Israel. And this is actually the key audience of the entire book. And this would also remind us that this is the northern kingdom. Remember, the southern kingdom is called Judah. And so the sons of Israel is with reference to the northern kingdom. And so we begin with an imperative. This word here is an imperative, it's a command. It's to tell the sons of Israel to hear. Now, we have seen this word before, and this is where God is telling the sons of Israel, open up your ears, listen to what I have to say. And this word davar, or davar as it stands alone, talks about issues or problem that God wants to deal with them. So each time you see this word davar, or the word as it is translated here, really is about God, and this is Jehovah God, bringing a charge, wanting to let them know there is some problem that he wants to address. So for the Lord has a case against the inhabitants of the land. What land? The land of Israel. And this would be the northern part of the land for the northern kingdom, right? So always keep that in mind, because there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. So every time you read about the land, it is the same land. Now, of course, when it is divided into the northern kingdom, then we talk about, in context, the northern kingdom, land of Israel. Then if you talk about the sons of Judah, or the house of Judah, or the kingdom of Judah, we're talking about the southern portion of the land. But the land as a whole is still the land of God. Now, understand the promised land, as I mentioned to you before, that the promised land was said to be given in 12 parcels to the 12 tribes of Israel, minus the tribe of Levi, or the Levites. They didn't get a piece of the inheritance. What I wanted to alert everyone is this. This land remains as God's land. It was given to them so that they can live in the land, to possess it, so that they can hand it down to their future generations. But nevertheless, it is still God's land. Always, the land is God's land. And so where it's God's land, there are God's rules. Now, this is something that I want us to bear in mind, because it brings it into context into the rest of this chapter. God is saying there is no faithfulness, nothing firm, nothing faithful, nothing truthful. There is no kindness. Kindness here is chesed. Chesed would be goodness or knowledge of God. We'll address this knowledge of God very shortly. But this is really the experience of God, how they know God and pass it down to the rest of the generations. But what does this mean here is very, very carefully, we need to be aware. These things that God is charging them. I have a case, right? This case means I have something that I am going to bring to your attention. I'm going to argue this. I'm going to show you how wrong you are. And it's about faithfulness and kindness. And this is about treatment of fellow men. And we see this in most of the prophet books, a concept called Hamas. Hamas is about violence and injustice, meaning a mistreatment of fellow men. And so when God says you have no faithfulness, you have no kindness, you are not being true to your fellow men, you cheat them, you lie to them, you're not taking care of the widows, the orphans, the poor, you're not showing goodness to them. And then finally it says knowledge of God in the land. Knowledge of God would be let me just draw it here, the experience to know God, to know the Lord. They're not teaching about God. They're not teaching the Torah. They are doing everything that is away from God. And so the people will have lesser and lesser knowledge of God, not knowing what God has done with the nation before. And now they focus more and more on the idols. And hence the idea of harlotry or whoredom or prostitution is very much a case against them where they are going after other gods. Verse 2, it says there is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, adultery. They employ violence so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Let's break this down. Remember, God is bringing a case against them right here. The case is this. There is swearing. Swearing means you are taking an oath to God, and in this case it will be a false swearing, right? A false swearing. And you know, God hates a false swear, and God really takes exception to that, because they will use the name of God to make an oath and they don't honor it, and so that's a false swearing. Deception here very much is to lie to each other, to disappoint each other, to deal falsely with each other. The next one is Radzak. Radzak is to murder or to kill. This is in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. Thou shalt not murder, not just kill, intentionally taking the life of another fellow man. That's what they're doing. Remember, this shows violence and injustice. This is God describing. And then they steal. The word steal is ganav. Here is it is, what do you say? It is to secretly take. That's stealing, right? Robbing would be in front of you, grabbing it, but stealing will be secretly taking it without your knowledge. Adultery, or the committing of adultery here, you can read it in two parts. One is they actually physically commit adultery, or secondly, it is idolatry. Idolatry is the second thing that God has against Israel. One is Hamas and one is idolatry. And in this case, you find that they are practicing what the warnings of all the prophets are bringing to them. God hates Hamas. God hates idolatry. And in so doing, God is now taking a case, making clear that he intentionally comes through the prophet Hosea to speak to them and to convey to them how angry God is. God says they employ violence. What is violence? Parats. Parats means they break each other down. They break down each other. And what do you mean by breaking down each other? They break down each other so that they shed blood. Now, shedding blood, damim, means to kill, to take a life. And this is the Hamas, the violence. There is violence, there is injustice, and there is idolatry. This is the classic problem that Israel has, both north and south, but in the book of Hosea, it's very much talking about the north at this point in time. Verse 3, it continues with the case. Therefore, the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes, along with the beasts of the field and the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea disappears. You find that when it says the land mourns, this one is lament. Feel really sorry, wailing out, bewail. The land with its people is in such a sad state. Those who live in it languish. The word languish means become weak. Right? Become weak. Exhausted. From all the things that's happening, they become sick. Along with every animal, every bird, every fish. And this word here, disappear, it basically, it causes themselves to be removed. Hence the word disappear, right? They are withdrawing, they are going away. And that's what it means, that the land is now getting poorer. There's nothing much more to eat. That's the kind of concept here. Verse 4, yet no one find fault. Let none offer reproof. This one says, only, yet, right? This is what it means, yet. Indeed, surely. Now, this other word, that men shall not contend, they shall not complain. Let them not offer reproof. Now, offer reproof. Reproof means to rebuke. Right? Rebuke. For your people are those who contend with the priests. This is the word, contend, is to bring a charge to the Kohen. Now, you would find this very similar to, let's say, in verse 4, at the time of Amos, later on, you would find in Amos chapter 7, right? You find that in Amos chapter 7, verse 16, the priests and the prophets, they do not like the teaching of God. And so what they do is that they complain and they find fault with them to silence the servants of God. And so God says, let them not do that, right? Let them not do that. You can also see down in verse 5, so you will stumble by day. Now in verse 5, so you as the children of Israel, you will stumble by day, and the prophet will also stumble with you by night, and I will destroy your mother. This is where God is saying that the consequence when they do that is that they will stagger, right? They will stumble, they will stagger. They cannot walk properly. They do not know how to conduct themselves. They are weak. And their prophet, and this one, I think we can read it in the plural as well. They are prophets, and this will be the false prophets of the pagan gods. They will also stumble by night. These are all very clear words that they are not able, how should we say, they are not able to stand, they are not able to function properly, right? They're not able to function properly. Why? Because they are all into idolatry. There is a consequence to that. And God says, I will destroy your mother. Now, understand in chapter 2, verse 4 of the 2 verse 4 of the Hebrew Bible, I think in chapter 2 verse 2 or chapter 2 verse 2 in the English Bible, we had that issue where the mother, as equivalent to the picture of Gomer, represents Israel. And God says, I will destroy your mother. What do you mean by destroy? And so let's be very clear. This word destroy means to silence. To silence, to cause to be dumb, right? To be dumb. And you can think of it this way, that when the blood of a person starts to drip away, the person become weak and the person will become quiet and the person will die. This word destroy comes from the word dama. And dama also comes from the word adama. Dama is from the word blood. And so this gives us a picture where it's like slowly when the blood drips off and the person becomes quiet, weak, cannot speak, and eventually die. And that's the picture of this word destroy, dama. Now comes our famous verse 6, and it uses exactly that same word. My people are destroyed. And so let's be very clear that this word, destroy, and this word is exactly the same word. And so God says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. So this is something that we have to see the character of God. The character of God is shown very clearly in such verses. In my people, this is singular. My people, Israel, have been silenced for lack of knowledge. Now, this word lack of knowledge needs a bit of an explanation. It means that it is without knowledge or failure of knowledge, right? What else? Lack of is a good word, right? They are without knowledge. They have no knowledge. They are wearing out their knowledge. Their knowledge is failing. That's the word for lack, right? And the word knowledge here, right? It's important for us to be very clear. The knowledge in these two verses is the same. It's the knowledge of God and the knowledge of God through the Torah. Now, understand knowledge is also experience to know. I would ask you to go back and read the book of Proverbs, where you will find the word knowledge, understanding, and wisdom all are synonyms of each other. And it is with regards to the knowledge of God in the Torah, in his word, basically, in his instructions. So let us now expand this a little bit. For the lack of knowledge of God through his word, because you have rejected this knowledge. Now, the rejection here means that the people have refused, right? Refused the knowledge. Now, we need to break this down as well. This word is to spurn. This word is to, how should we say, reject, throw away, spurn, cause to disappear. That is what reject means. They are discarding the knowledge of God. They are discarding the knowledge of the Torah. Now, this is how it's understood in the Hebrew. Now, why is this so important? Is because the Torah, unfortunately for us, is that in the English is translated as law right here. But it is not law. The Torah of your God, or the Torah of God, basically means the instructions and directions that God has laid out for his people to follow, how to conduct their lives. It also portrays how God will deal with them, the judgments God made. How did God take care of them, rescue them, save them, provided for them, told them what to do, how to be holy, how to be priests. That's in the Torah. Now, if they reject the Torah, then they will not have any knowledge of what God has done for them in the past. That is what it means, that my people are silenced. They are now weak. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to teach, because their knowledge of God is disappearing, is failing, because you have discarded this knowledge. And hence, this knowledge of God in his Torah, in his instructions and direction, is very important, because it guides the people how to live. And so if you don't have that knowledge of God's instruction, then how should one live? And so they have replaced this knowledge of the Torah of God with the knowledge of the idols. That is the challenge here. And so if you have thrown away and caused the knowledge of the Torah to disappear, then I will also cause you to disappear from being my priest. You read this in Exodus chapter 19. Let's see. Exodus chapter 19, as an office of priests. You will find this in, let's see, in verse 6, that God says that Israel as a nation is going to be a kingdom of priests. It's not to say that everyone is a priest, but they will actually have priests and they will actually conduct themselves with regards to God's rules. That's what it means. And deal in that relationship with God. So God says, I will also cause this to disappear, that you will not have the chance to be priests anymore, since you have forgotten. Now, this is what God is charging them. Forget means to ignore. It means to cease to care. Meaning that the law of God, the Torah of God, is no longer important. Well, we can just put it aside. We don't need to take care of it anymore. We don't need to bother with what God says. So this is what God says. You, as my people, have ignored, you cease to care the Torah of your God. So I, Jehovah, will also ignore or cease to care for your children. So you understand, the mother is Gomer, the children will be Jezreel, will be Lo Ruhamah, will be Lo Ami. No, that's all this in chapter 1. No, it's that picture of it. And so God says, if you do this, I will forget. I will ignore your children who is to come after you here. Right? It is very important. Verse 7. The more they multiplied, became more numerous. They have more children, the more they sinned against me. This word sin is, well, I guess you can say that this is khatat, and it means that they have missed their mark. They have missed against me. Which means this, in the Torah, which I can say here, God's rules, they missed it. Now, what do they mean by missing? It's like, you get a recipe to bake a cake and you miss some of the ingredients. You have the form of a cake, but you don't really have that cake. So you have missed. You shoot an arrow and you miss the target. And so now you want to know how far off you have missed. That is the word translated as khatat. It's sin, right? They have missed everything against God. That God told them to do 10 things, they did 9. Not that they did 11, they did 9. They missed out, right? They missed out. And then it says here, and will change their glory into shame. What is glory? Glory will be their honor. What will shame then be? Shame will be dishonor. It will be disgraceful. So God is telling them, it not only becomes disgraceful, they will actually become, how should we say? They will become nobody. They will become light. As honor is weight, shame will be light, no weight. They will become like nobody. And this is what God is saying. Now, when you have God, God have made you my people, you keep sinning, then I will take away your glory and I will make you feel shameful. That's verse 7. This is God's warning, taking up this cause against them. Verse 8. They feed on the sin of my people and direct their desire toward their iniquity. They feed. This really has to do with how they conduct their lives. This is all with regards to idolatry. It says here, they eat, right? They eat the sin of my people. And to say they eat the sin, this would be the sin offering. Of my people. Now, this one you have to go back and read Leviticus. I think it's chapter 4 to 5. 4 to 7 would be good. And in the sin offering, as it is offered, the priests will eat the balance that's not burnt. When it says they, this will refer to the false priests. The priests of the pagan gods. They are eating this sin offering because all of that is supposed to be for the Levites, for the priests, sorry, not the Levites, for the priests. And so this says here, they direct their desire toward their iniquity. The word iniquity here is avon, right? They twist the laws of God and they direct their desire, they lift up their soul, right? Lift up their nephesh toward their iniquity. Now, in a sin offering, it's when someone has sinned and they bring an offering and offer to God. The false priests are the ones that is conducting this and eating it up. And so by eating the sin offering, it is the expression of directing their desires toward their sin. They're eating up their sin, so to speak, right? And it will be like people, like priests. And so I will punish them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. Like people, like priests. What does it mean? This is two comparison. The people is already having Hamas, idolatry, and God has a charge against them. The priests are not conducting themselves properly. They are false priests who eats the sin offering as if they are eating the sin of the people. And so God says, that is against my rules. Now remember, in the tabernacle, when you offer the sacrifices, God's house, God's rules. So you can't actually simply offer and people simply do things. And so God says, I will punish. Now the word punish is to visit. Visit them with judgment for their ways, how they conduct themselves. And then I will repay. This word repay is shuv, give back to them for their deeds. The word deeds here means their practices. They practice things which is bad. This is evil in the sight of God. Now you notice that the character of God is this. God's judgment is on what is done. Notice their ways, their deeds, not their thoughts. And God will be just, to give them what they have done according to what they have done. Now, just means it is equal. It cannot be more. And so God says, I will repay them for their practices, what they have done evil. I'm giving them as they have done. Verse 10. God is just. That's how we see God here. They will eat, but they will not have enough. They will not have enough to eat. They will play the harlot, but they will not increase because they have stopped giving heed to the Lord. So what does this mean? It's a bit difficult to convey, so let me attempt this. They will eat and they will not be satisfied. They will play the harlot. Now, some of the commentaries have said that they actually have children by others, not their wives. And they will not increase. There will be no increase in children. Now, in an Oriental setting, children is very important. It is a sign of fruitfulness, like even in the Chinese culture. God says, well, they can eat, they will not be satisfied. They can play the harlot, they can try to have children everywhere, but they will not have any more children because they have stopped giving heed to the Lord. Now, the word stop giving heed to the Lord, how should we say? They have forsaken, right? Stop here means forsaken. They have forsaken, they have left behind. They have stopped doing that in that sense. Giving heed means to keep. That's what it means. To keep what God has told them to. Which means this: disobedience will not be blessed. Now, that's another character of God. God doesn't bless anyone who disobeys God. That you stop keeping the laws of God. You stop keeping what God tells you. This is the warning that God has made to them, that as you carry on, you will eat less and less. You hope to have more children, you would have less and less. God will judge. Verse 11. Harlotry, wine, new wine, will take away the understanding. Again, need to break this down. Okay. Now we know harlotry, as we know the word harlotry, is where people commit adultery. They would have other men, right? Where the women sells themselves and be provided by other men. That's harlotry. Wine and new wine, strong wine, weak wine. Well, we can call it alcohol if you want to say this. They take away, and the word take away, lachak. Lachak means to take whole, right? To take whole and remove. It is to seize and to seize so that you cannot execute. Now, what do I mean by this? So understand this. The word understanding comes from the word heart. So it says harlotry, prostitution, wine, yain, and weak wine or new wine, tirosh, freshly pressed wine. Okay, you want to say that, where it has very low level of alcohol. All of them will take away the heart, the choices. And so you find that you have idolatry plus alcohol. Both are considered things that will influence your choices. And in this case, they are to be mindful. They are to be clear that if their choices is for God, they cannot dabble in this to then make decisions. Their understanding will be clouded. Their understanding will be removed. That's what it means, right? Will be removed. And so all of these is to point to this fact that God is bringing a case against the northern kingdom, that everything is going wrong in society, in Hamas, in injustice, in idolatry, in the way that they conduct their lives. It is not according to what God has taught them. And hence God has made it a point to send Hosea to warn them, to tell them what is going to happen. Although we have read in chapters 1, 2, and 3 about prophetic utterances of things that's going to happen in the future, but God is now reminding them, now, if they carry on this trajectory, it is not going to end well. Now, with this, we will come to an end of our study today in verse 11, and we'll continue next week.